Phone over to our program director, Margaret Bartos, who will introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome everyone. I'm very proud to introduce a very special lady tonight. She is a Michigan native and a graduate of the University of Michigan. As a very young woman, she became an unarmed Red Cross civilian during the Vietnam War. She was one of the first women permitted in foxholes, and she was in jungle combat areas. She brought a touch of back home to the soldiers there. She didn't pass out donuts, but she conversed with them, and they sang songs and played games and just brought a little bit of home to them. She kept a diary of her experiences that evolved into the only book about Vietnam that was written by a woman. Please welcome a very true American patriot, Joan Kotcher.
It's a privilege to be here to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. Each day in the war was its own chapter, filled with sorrow, life, death, and heroism. The true story of the Vietnam War and those who served in it will never be completely known. My book is a historic fragment of what it is to be a warrior. It is not politically correct. It is historically correct. Your members stand tall as people who love and cherish our towns and cities, while upholding the best of our country's values and virtues, and the foundations and principles that gave birth to this country. My family shares those traditions of valor. I come from a long line of patriots. When you have a name like Puffer, it's easy to trace your roots. Two of my ancestors, the wife and eldest son of Matthias Puffer, were killed by Indians while out berry picking, and several of his best cattle, probably just as valuable. They were victims in King Philip's War at Mendon, Massachusetts in 1675, more than 100 years before we became a country. The Puffer name peppers the rolls of those who gave their lives in the wars that followed. We honor the bravery of those who fought to create and to defend our great country, but nothing is static. Our nation has had to prove we could defend our interests many times during our turbulent history. Vietnam was one of those times. I returned home after a year in Vietnam, no longer an idealistic 20-year-old. I had become a cautious realist. I recall carefully folding my light blue uniform and storing it on a closet shelf in my new apartment in Flint. It had served me well. Perspiration stains and all. A year's worth of friendships, fear, dangers, successes, failures, and a dab of a love story now was relegated to a closet. Outside, I could see young people. They weren't doing anything remarkable. They swam in the pool, washed their cars, talked to each other, arranged dates, everyday activities. This had all become foreign to me. I was a stranger in my own homeland. I was no longer a participant, but I felt a pride that I had helped protect their way of life. I was a Donut Dolly, a proud member of a division of the American Red Cross, going back to the First World War. Its purpose was to inspire the soldiers by reminding them of the people they had left back home, their mothers and sisters, nieces and cousins, their girlfriends, or maybe that cute girl next door they never had the courage to talk to. We were close to the men. We were a letter from home. One veteran told me, everybody was in love with a donut dolly. The Red Cross warned us in training. The soldiers wouldn't love us. They loved the recollections of their home, their family, and their country, and those things we represented. That's what they saw when they saw me. One veteran told me, when we saw you, we left Vietnam for a few minutes, and we were home. When I arrived in Vietnam, I was a donut dolly, a recreation supervisor. I had 14 months of experience with the Red Cross in Korea. Soon after my arrival in Vietnam, I almost joined my patriotic ancestors. On Thanksgiving in 1966, when everybody was getting ready to turn in, a few officers were standing near a bunker. One had acquired a bottle of cheap champagne. They offered me a taste in a small paper cup. I think it was a specimen cup from the hospital. As the officer poured my portion, we heard 3 sniper shots. Crack, crack, crack. Bullets exploded a few inches from my head. Everyone dropped to the ground. I realized that the sniper had targeted my light blue uniform with me in it. The Red Cross might as well have painted a bullseye on my back. The Viet Cong wanted to kill a donut dolly. It would be debilitating to the military's morale. This time, they missed. Thank you, Lord, for people who can't shoot straight. Why the name Donut Dolly? In World War II, young American Red Cross women passed out donuts and coffee to our troops in rest areas in England. The men called them Donut Dollies. The name stuck through Korea and then in Vietnam. In Korea, we had recreation programs with games and stories and donuts. In Vietnam, we didn't have donuts. In the words of one mess sergeant, it was too damn hot to make them. I served first in Korea for 14 months, and then 12 months in Vietnam, during some of the early ferocious days of the war, 1966-67. I was the 45th donut dolly to arrive in Vietnam, and one of the first to go into the combat zone. Some of the time, we could give recreation programs. More often, combat vehicles took us to the frontline foxholes to serve beside our soldiers. We went wherever commanders requested. That was our job, 7 days a week. I traveled from the Central Highlands in the north to the Mekong Delta in the south, from the South China Sea on the east to the Cambodian border on the west. In fact, I served throughout most of the country. This jacket tells many stories of heroism. Some of these are the patches I wore, and the patches I wore are on that first poster. The rest are patches soldiers wore in combat. I have 3 dozen, more or less. Oh, incidentally, the light blue uniform that I was putting away at the beginning of the speech, this is it. It has shrunk a little. When I wrote the book, Donut Dolly, I wanted others to feel and understand what it was like to be there, to be a witness to that war. I wrote what I saw and what I did. The book is a time capsule reflected in the diary I kept. Bravery and honor. Those are just 2 of the virtues that in one way or another all our veterans share. including these guys in the front row right here and a few others that I know about. Thank you, fellas. When our veterans and I first arrived in Vietnam, we were scared. But we learned to manage our fear. We earned the right to understand the meaning of courage. It was the foundation of the bravery we found in ourselves. It gave us the confidence to represent the best of those who have served and earned the right to the title of veteran. We've drawn on that strength throughout our lives. This pride is one of the unspoken and priceless benefits of our service. There were 600 Donut Dollies in Vietnam over the 10 years of the war. The program ended in 1972. As our military slowly left, the country became too dangerous. Here is a story that I think you'll enjoy. This is a diary. The entry is Thursday, December 29th. It's not very far from today, is it? The biggest success we had, and this at this place we had a recreation center where people could come in. We all agreed was a talent show. Maddie was in charge, and Fifth helped. She was from Long Island and had just arrived from the Philippines to replace Ginny. Fifth, like Maddie, was also small and older than the rest of us. Their longer experience probably accounted for the program's success. Maddie and Fifth put out a call for performers, and plenty of volunteers signed up. The acts rehearsed in secret. We had no idea what to expect until they actually performed. When showtime neared, we ran out of chairs and places to put the audience. The room buzzed with anticipation. We estimated we had a crowd of about 130 people. All the acts were excellent. Some looked better than amateurs to me. The bill that night was complete with singers, musicians, and creative goof-offs who made everyone roar with laughter. One man from New York in particular sang a song that transfixed the house. He had a strong, trained voice and a relaxed, natural stage presence that he could have learned on Broadway. When he sang, he walked around and moved his whole body with the grace of a dancer. At one point, he bent over and lifted one knee to emphasize a phrase. When he finished, the crowd erupted with applause. The surprise of the evening turned out to be a group of orphans from an orphanage our men supported. We expected about 40 children to sing and dance and watch the show. Our eyes went wide with delight when more than 100 shy, scrubbed Vietnamese children arrived on a big army truck. The children neither sang nor danced. They didn't have to. They had to sit on the men's laps since there was already standing room only. Men eagerly reached for the children and boosted them up onto each other's laps. Oh, the disappointment when there were not enough children to go around. Some men had to share a child. In the U.S. Army, there's nothing like homesick servicemen when it comes to children, especially orphans. To touch a child, to hold a child, transported a man home to his own family. He felt the little hand, heard the little voice, and remembered children he had left behind. He was home with them for a few happy minutes. We sat one little girl on a man's lap, and she grabbed him around the neck and wouldn't let go, even when it was time to go home. The man's face was a wreath of smiles. Another little girl fell asleep the man who held her, came to me carrying her carefully. He whispered, "It's so hot. Do you have anything I could fan her with?" I whispered back, "How about this piece of cardboard?" "That's great, thanks." The man held her gently and fanned her all evening. When it came to say goodbye, you would have thought the men were saying goodbye to their own children. At the end of the evening, the truck drove away with the sleepy orphans all packed together in the back. The men quietly, sadly gathered to watch them go. They talked about it for days. I thought, how lucky these orphans are to have a home and someone to care for them. There are so many children on the streets everywhere, dirty, hungry, sleeping wherever they can. I understood how different Americans are. These men's humanity never left them. With no thought of anything in return, they would do whatever was in their power to help people they didn't know. That including caring for a child and fighting an enemy. Their job compelled them to fight. I had seen the true face of the soldiers, whom even some errant Americans called baby killers. Years later, someone said to me, "Such images of U.S. soldiers as being concerned about children are propagated by the government as part of its effort to drum up support for the war effort. Shocking. I disagree. Those with an agenda must subserve to the truth and use history as history rather than history as opinion." General William Westmoreland, commander of military assistance, invited the Donut Dollies to serve alongside his soldiers. We didn't know it, but that was the first time women were allowed in a combat zone. The Donut Dollies went in right after the first landing of Marines. My Red Cross number was 45. I was the 45th Donut Dolly to arrive in Vietnam, and one of the first to go into the battle zone. Later, other women pointed to us and asked, "If the Donut Dollies can do it, why can't we?" Women in the combat zone was bold in 1966. Today, women have the right to work in most military specialties, and as a consequence, civilian women have made parallel progress. Imagine General Westmoreland, a military man, is responsible for spearheading women's rights and opportunities for advancement. Donut Dollies were not nurses. Officially, we were recreation for able-bodied troops, those not in hospitals, though we did visit hospitals whenever we could. Our purpose was to raise morale, to help the soldiers remember home. Our duty was to work with combat and combat support troops in isolated areas. Unarmed, without any type of weapon, our assignment was to give our young soldiers a break from the war for a few minutes. They respected the reason we were there. That assignment was often more dangerous than most people would expect. I was inches from being killed half a dozen times. I had to be prepared for a bullet whizzing past me, a mortar shell to land a short distance away, or being surrounded by Viet Cong. With 600 Donut Dollies over the 10 years of the war, there might have been 60 of us in the whole country at any one time. We covered an area about the size of the lower peninsula of Michigan. We were a rare sight. In 1966, the Army nurses had to stay in the rear areas. Other military women, the WACs, Women's Army Corps, weren't allowed to be in Vietnam until late in my tour. And as far as I know, the Navy women, the WAVES, women expected for volunteer emergency service, had never gone past Hawaii. I once met a World War II WAVE. She said that was true. The gift of my war experience from our military is why I had to write the book that chronicles the life of one of the first women allowed in a combat zone. People ask, was I scared? No, I was terrified until I got used to my surroundings. The enemy was all around us. Artillery fired day and night. Bugs crawled everywhere. The day shift of insects, like loyal workers, were always on time, nibbling on any exposed body parts. Sirens woke us every night. We had to grab our combat gear and run to a bunker. We sat there for hours, slapping malaria mosquitoes, waiting for a shell to land on us and kill us. One night at An-Kay, when all four of us were new, there's somebody here from An-Kay, was there. There you go. The siren screamed shortly after dark. We weren't in our tent where we could grab our combat gear. We just ran from wherever we were and dove into our bunker. The 8 nurses from the hospital dove in behind us, and some random soldiers who happened to be nearby. I lay on the floor where I fell inside the bunker. It was pitch black. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, not even when my eyes got used to the dark. Nothing. No one dared to move. You couldn't see where anyone was or who anyone was, male or female. If you moved an inch, you felt a body. From comments in the dark, from disembodied voices, I calculated there were 15 people in that 8 by 10 foot bunker. 8 nurses, 4 Donut Dollies, the chaplain, who was a captain, a lieutenant, and a major. I noticed that the only person in the bunker who was armed was the chaplain. It was Sunday, he was working. I learned recently that since 1977, chaplains are now not allowed to be armed. They have an assistant who is armed and goes with them. But I don't think that's enough. Also, when they're in a Humvee, there's an extra weapon. I can't see, with the enemies we are fighting, why we have such restrictions. In the bunker at An-Kay, the mortars crashed around us. Then our own artillery, the big guns, began answering. We Dollies jumped and froze with fear with every explosion. The lieutenant laughed. He said, "You know what they say, don't worry, you never hear the one that gets you." That didn't help. The major was more sympathetic. He told us, "Listen, if you hear a boom, you will hear a swish." We listened. We heard boom, swish. He said, "If you hear the boom first, then the swish, it's ours going out. The gun fires, the swish is the shell flying overhead. And the other boom, when the shell lands, is so far away you won't hear anything." I learned later while writing Donut Dolly that guns are never allowed to fire over people because a short round could always land anywhere under the path of the shell. That precaution was out the window, evidently. In the blacked out bunker, the major told us, If you hear the swish first, then the boom, it's an enemy mortar coming in. In my mind, I finished the thought. That's the one that might get you. We relaxed a little, listening to the boom swish. Then we heard it, swish, but no boom. Everyone froze. It sounded like it was right on top of us. We held our breath and waited for the explosion. Where? And we waited and waited. It never came. Slowly, we relaxed a little, but not quite fully. We went back to talking quietly and listening, but we never really relaxed. No one dared ask what happened to that last boom. After a couple of hours, a runner came and announced the all clear. We went back to our tent and never spoke of it again. After a few weeks in Vietnam, I learned where the real dangers were and where it was safe. I relaxed and could go about my work normally, as we did in the bunker. Then a few weeks later, I learned that some places we thought were safe really weren't. We didn't know we were in danger until days or weeks after, or sometimes years, as I did about the rule against being under a flying artillery shell. Then it was too late to be scared. Donut Dolly will forever be the only professionally published book about the Vietnam War written by a woman. Barely 100 Donut Dollies remain. I'm the only one in Michigan. Donut Dolly. An American Red Cross Girls' War in Vietnam. Was conceived in a diary I kept in Vietnam. The final draft was published in 2011. I spoke at the VFW, or the American Legion, just shortly after that. You guys probably heard one of the first not great speeches. Well, that wasn't bad. Thank you. You're kind. I dedicated 8 years researching and writing the book. If it were a child, it would be 8 years old and in the 3rd grade. It was worth it. I could not use books or periodicals for reference. What I wrote had never been published. I had to use people, eyewitnesses. I contacted veterans organizations. Their members verified facts. And their names are in the footnotes, and their medals. They are heroes. Weeks of research and personal contacts led to hundreds of old new friends. Veterans talked to me when they would not talk to anyone else. They still think of me as a Donut Dolly, one of them. And I got a few nice hugs here tonight. That's nice. One soldier who learned that we had both been at Landing Zone Betty at Fantillette told me we both trod the same dirt. The University of North Texas, my publisher, was as demanding and vicious as a colleague I had taught with in Flint, Sister Mary Godzilla. But it was North Texas money that would back the book. It was the publisher's reputation. I couldn't be mostly right. Last October, the Daughters of the American Revolution honored Donut Dolly with their National Award for Women in American History. I was proud and humbled. The American Library Association has recommended Donut Dolly for school and public libraries. Some of you may want to donate some signed copies to your schools, libraries, and museums. I called up the library here. I thought it'd be really great if I got to see my book on the shelf in the library. And so she looked it up and she said, yes, we have 2 copies I wanted to ask her, where is it? How do I go find it? She said they're both out. Still haven't seen it. My diary and the book cover 1 year. A year that seemed endless. My book is a time capsule of both heroism and history. It's a university bestseller. It has received 35 national and international literary awards. The newest one is from the Pentagon. Commanders asked Donut Dollies to take risks. Our visits meant so much. We dove into bunkers alongside the soldiers. We were unarmed, fellow warriors, dressed in sky blue. The soldiers with the most need were the ones in the most danger. I was a civilian, not allowed to carry a weapon, but our brothers accepted me as one of them. I had shared their discomforts and dangers in Vietnam. Bone-rotting heat, boot-sucking red mud, incoming mortar shells, hours of crouching in bunkers, crawling with scorpions and rats. Here are some of the hundreds of pictures I took in Vietnam. Brian, would you please, this monster. This is the transportation we had at one of the units in Korea. It belonged to the unit. And that was when I first got that field jacket. We went out to the field and passed out donuts to the folks out in the field a time or two, and they were really thrilled. Thanks. I was transferred. Their system was to transfer us about every 3 months. They told us that it was to keep us fresh so we wouldn't get stale. I think it was to keep us from getting married. This is one of the times that I was transferred. This is one of the units in Korea. That's me on this end. I was a blonde then. This is the first trip in Vietnam, on my way from Saigon to my first unit on K, the 1st Cavalry. We lost an engine on the way up. Why we lost it, we don't know. Whether it was shot out or mechanical failure, I don't know. We landed at Pleiku and had to get out and wait, and this man was there. It turns out he was a reporter, but he was also used to be a Marine. He served in Korea, and he made the landing at Incheon with the Marines. Very interesting man. And he was a reporter. This is my first home, the tent. This is a general purpose tent. They use this for everything. And we're showing off how pale I was when I first arrived. The girl there had transferred in from Guam, I believe. So she had part of a tour there, and the other guy had been here for some time. Okay. This is the modern Army mule. And those tents are just behind us here is the hospital. So those tents are the doctors, the nurses, and the corpsmen. And then our tent was one more down this way. So we were with them. Next. This is a visit to the village. The field director, who was a different section, he wasn't part of us, but he kind of watched over us. He took me on a tour of the village when I first got there. Yeah. These are some of the local ladies. You'll notice that there's some debris in the road. That's an open sewer. And you'll also notice the ladies, some of them are barefoot. I don't know why they all dress alike, but that's what they did. This is a school. How many school teachers we have here? Yeah, a few. Yeah, how would you like to teach in that school? I blew that up so I could see what it is. It's 5 rows. There are 10 children in each row. They're sitting on a continuous bench. The desk is a continuous board. They're sitting against each other, and there are 10 children in a row. The first 2 rows, I think it is, are girls, and the other 3 are boys. So you've got 50, 60 kids, and no wall, and the traffic is roaring by. And if you have been watching, you've seen more kids on the street running around loose than there are in that school. It was a privilege to go to that school, as we all understand. But my parents were teachers, I was a teacher, my aunts and uncles and cousins were teachers, and this was absolutely amazing to me. Next. This is a gun on the bridge that connects the village to the army post. As I was emailing back and forth with people, they told me that the VC blew up that bridge shortly after I left. The gun didn't stop them. This is the interior of the recreation center. It was a tent, 2 tents end to end, right near the hospital. And then there was a small office tent on the end. And we were always crowded. That's me, I sat and watched a card game for a little while. Various activities that we had. This is, I shot this from the doorway of our tent. It's a helicopter, a medevac, and an ambulance. They're taking a patient out. And, okay. This is the next unit where I served. That first unit had 4 girls. This unit has 3. That's me standing. The pictures on the wall are an art contest we had at the recreation center. It was pretty small. Next. This is the 3rd place, 1st Infantry Division. This tent has seen better days. The water stains there. They were building a permanent building for the recreation center, but meanwhile, this is what I saw. And the men are looking, when I first got in there, I saw the men were all sitting silently watching one corner of the tent. I'm thinking, what's going on? They had a TV. I hadn't seen a TV since I left home. And we watched the University of Michigan football game on TV one day. It was really great. This is a trip we took. You can see it's an artillery unit because you can see the shells stacked up out there. It's pretty hard walking, and if you can see it, we're wearing combat boots. This was 1st Infantry Division. This is the fire control direction tent. We were walking around visiting the people, and you can see the guy on the other side. He's calculating. These are the guys who they get the order to fire the gun, and then they calculate the numbers how they set the gun to fire where they want it to fire. And he's doing calculations on a slide rule. How many people here have used a slide rule? Okay, that's what a lot of people. That's what they used back then. And then he told me, he said, the guns are sitting there not doing anything right now. Would you like to say hello to them? So he called the guns and gave the phone to me. And I said, hello, this is Joanne from the Red Cross. Silence. They were absolutely floored out of their socks to hear an American woman's voice. It was really wonderful. This is a trip we took from 1st Infantry down to the Delta. We had to leave early in the morning, so the MPs came and got us and took us to the helipad. As you can see, they have been out all night. The mud up to the hubcap, up to the top there. It is really not necessary when going from the Donut Dolly quarters to the helipad to be guarded by a 60mm machine gun. But it makes it look important. So they sent one of their machine guns to guard us. This is a helicopter we took. You can see on the door there the signature that this is the Champagne flight. They had some good artists in there. Okay. This is a street scene in Saigon. We were riding the bus. We came up about a load of soldiers, just normal and running around through the streets. Next. This is Highway 1, which it was actually the main highway. On the map you could see it runs from Saigon all the way up the coast, or not in the coast, but it's the only actual major road in the country. And we had to drive on it whenever we went to Saigon. And this was a convoy that had stopped for some reason, and everybody was waiting for something. Next. At Christmas, the Army issued Christmas decorations. Now, my family owned a Christmas tree plantation near Traverse City. So to me, a fake Christmas tree is sacrilegious. But to everybody else, it was wonderful. This is what they used for the cover. This is a trip that we took from Benoit to Bearcat. Bearcat was a new area which they were building. They were bringing in troops, and so they were preparing it for the troops to come in. And you can see I'm wearing an armored vest and a steel helmet. Whenever you went someplace, before you go, you checked with security to see how the conditions are, what the rule is. If you're traveling on the surface, then you have, whether or not you have to travel with a convoy, or if you can travel alone, or whether you have to have somebody riding shotgun, which is somebody else other than the driver who has a weapon. And in this case, our driver probably had a weapon, and we were required to wear armored vests and steel helmets. Next. We drove around, and whenever we saw a crew working, we would stop and do some kind of a little activity. This is a game where we had 2 boards and probably some kind of trivia game. And the 2 groups, we divide them into 2 groups, and they're racing to answer the questions. And we walk around and watch them do it. The games were intended for a way for us to talk to them, to interact with them, because a lot of times they were so isolated. A girl walks up, they wouldn't know what to say. They just probably stand there with their mouth open, which is what they would do. And so we would initiate a conversation, or we would have some kind of activity that would interact with them. These men were working on a bulldozer, so we stopped, and this was some other little flashcard thing that we had. At the recreation center, we would have coffee and maybe some kind of pastry that the mess hall would send. And we never let people just take something. We always would serve, and we always would say something to them, talk to them when we gave it to them. So there was that communication going around. This was the huge, enormous recreation center that we had, with our huge, enormous patio, almost big enough for a coffee pot. But we had a coffee hour every Sunday morning. And usually it was way too hot to be there, but people were so used to it that they went anyway. And I have a story about it later. This is a trip to the Benoit Air Base, where they had the jets. You'll notice the we would drive around, and whenever we saw crews working, we would stop and pass out something to drink, Kool-Aid probably. And they were always thirsty. It was so hot with that cement, no shade. You almost couldn't breathe. It was so hot. And you'll notice there are walls around the planes. When they first opened the air base, the VC got in and blew up some of the planes and did kill some people. So they put in these blast barriers so that if they blow something up, it will stay contained in the place where it is. This is a trip out to the field to where the soldiers are resting. We had a game to play, and we got them yelling and shouting and having a good time. And you'll notice that in the background, I don't know if you can tell it, there's a patrol coming, moving along behind them. It's hard to tell. It's almost next to my head over there. Okay? This is a trip to a place called Nui Ba Din, which was a mountain in the middle of a flat plain of rice fields. There wasn't a group of them, there was just one. And we had a radio relay station at the top. So they were so isolated that they almost never saw anybody. And it was interesting because we went in and we sat down with them, 10 or 13 people was all that was there, and the sergeant sat right there and watched them very carefully. And we were sitting around the table talking, and one of the men said something like damn or some real mild swear word, and the sergeant exploded. He said, "Watch your mouth, Jesus Christ, there's ladies present." You can see that we're above the clouds, and you can also see that the helicopter is not shut down. The rotor is spinning, you can't see it. And that's because it's a precaution that they can take off at a second's notice if anything happens. It's just not a very secure place. And then coming up the hill, you see porters carrying supplies. We owned the top, the VC owned the sides and bottom, but they allowed porters to carry supplies it was a strange war. This is a time when we really surprised some people. We went out to serve breakfast. These people had just come off a night ambush, and they were waiting in line for breakfast in an outdoor mess line, and we showed up. And it was absolutely unbelievable to them. They were really surprised. And this is what they were eating for breakfast. And there were 5 of us. And we each chose something to serve. And each time you give something to a man, you speak to him, talk about something, and he gets a chance to talk to an American girl, a real morale builder. Recognize the man on the far end? Yes, James Garner. There were movie stars who came to Vietnam. And Captain Goodwin there was the Special Forces captain in charge of supplies and things like that. And when he had a good trip, he would invite us to go along. So that's me, and the girl there was from Atlanta. We spent all day hopping from one place to another, riding with James Garner. I have loved him ever since I was a teenager, and he did not disappoint. He was wonderful. He had served in Korea, and he had 1 or, I don't know, 2 Purple Hearts. and he was wonderful with the men. Somebody would start to take his picture and he would say, "Here, give the camera to them. You come here and get into the picture with me." And then when lunch came, we each went to a different mess hall. He didn't eat. He went to another place where he could see more of the soldiers. He was really, really wonderful. This is an old guard. They wear the three-corner hat because this unit is the oldest continuously serving unit in the Army, dating back to George Washington. One of their units is the unit that guards the Tomb of the Unknowns in Washington, D.C. And if you've ever looked up the requirements for those guards, it is unbelievable. Among the requirements are that their liquor or alcohol cannot cross their lips for their entire life. Their waist has to stay at 23 inches or something unbelievable for the rest of their life. I don't know. I mean, I do pretty well, but I couldn't do that. It's just a wonderful thing that they do. And I got to visit with them, and they are pretty special. This is the delta where we were is a strange tidal area. In the morning, at high tide, everything is flooded. As you can see, the house is built on a mound. And in back, you can see there's a fishing net. And these people keep ducks instead of chickens. And there almost nobody lives there. But it's a very special place, okay? And then in the afternoon, go ahead, it's a tidal mud flat. These people are clamming, digging for clams. We were riding along in a Jeep, and our driver was our escort, and he told us to watch these people carefully because there wasn't really that much fighting in the Delta, but these people were still dangerous. And they could be stooping down to pick up a clam and stand up with a hand grenade and toss it into the Jeep. And he was armed, and he kind of shifted in the seat so that he could get to his weapon if he needed to. The people we visited were building this bridge. It was, we had to cross the river on a boat. The man in the orange life vest is just leaving. That was our boat. And we're walking on the gunnels of boats that have been tied together for us to walk across. This is one of the most dangerous things. They would lose a lot of helicopters this way. In the dry season, a helicopter try to land would blow up a lot of dust, and then you couldn't see anything. And in a helicopter, I guess also fixed wing, I'm not really positive about that, if you can't see, you can't tell if you're right side up or wrong side up. And you can't tell how far you are from the ground. So I see some nodding. And this, a lot of these would crash in that situation. These are VC prisoners of war. They were cared for by the Old Guard. And we were walking around looking at everything, and the lieutenant said, "Well, would you like to see some of the prisoners?" "Oh, yeah, cool." And he said, "Okay, guys, come on." They came from all directions. They weren't locked up. They were working, probably since they saw us. They probably stopped working and were staring at us from wherever they were. But he told us that these are prisoners of war that they keep here, they gave them food and clothing. They gave them work to do and tools to do the work, and they paid them for the work. This was a program called Chu Hoi, which means open arms, trying to show the enemy that we're a better friend than an enemy, and that these people were being well treated, and that they should respect us for it. And I was trying to figure out, why is it that he had me kneel down? But you look at the size of these men, I would have been so much higher that it would have made an odd-looking picture, because the Vietnamese people are small, or were at that time, and it's their diet and their heredity, I guess. Oh, that's it. That's the end. Thank you. A veteran once told me, seeing a donut dolly after 10 or 11 months in the field was like seeing a living angel. That was one of your guys. Why is the book important? Because it chronicles the everyday Vietnam soldier from the woman's point of view. These are the soldiers who were humiliated in their own country. Some people said then, as they do today, they hated the war but loved the soldiers. That is a lie. They hated the soldiers. Otherwise, why did they spit on them? A short time ago, a woman sent me a note. She asked me to mail a book to a relative who lived in Arizona. She said he served in Vietnam, and when his tour was over, he traveled from San Francisco to Chicago, where he met his wife. And she said he was so abused on that trip across country that when he met his wife, he took off his uniform and threw it in the trash. I believe her. Some people said some pretty mean things to me. This is one of the reasons why I wrote the book. I wanted the people to know our veterans, their bravery, humility, and above all, their humanity, and the fears and successes, humanness and heroism of our American soldiers. These are the veterans who told me when I was right and when I was wrong. In wartime, ordinary men face dangers with a constant courage. Our soldiers knew they had a job to do, and they did their job with honor and bravery. They faced a war that was hell, as if it were an everyday occurrence, because it was. Their fear and courage welded into an army that disdained defeat. And the struggles still go on, met with men and women with the same courage of the soldiers of so many wars. We honor their bravery. We honor their commitment. Freedom is not free. I was 10 days from going home. It looked like I would make it in one piece, though it had started to feel like my luck was running out. In a helicopter, 2 of us girls, with an escort officer and crew, hopped from one special forces camp to another, deep in Viet Cong territory. Night was falling. The Viet Cong owned the night. A tropical storm was closing in. To fly a helicopter through a storm would be suicidal. Our chopper spiraled down and landed. We waited. The storm got worse. The weather report said it surrounded us. We had a choice: stay on the ground overnight and be attacked by the VC, for sure, or try to fly out and be torn apart by the storm, or worse, be struck by lightning and crash and burn. Everyone looked at me to make the decision. I didn't know why. I was 107 pounds of sweating blonde. I was thrust into command to give a life or death order to men with M60 machine guns with bullets as long as a number 2 pencil. I had no time to think. I said, let's go, taking my chances with God. The co-pilot, crew chief, and gunner stood up. Our escort officer, Captain Goodwin, same one in the picture, frowned. A jeep brought us to the helicopter. The night hung black and blood warm. Tropical air folded heavily around us. The rain had stopped. I climbed into the helicopter and fumbled for a seatbelt. This was the only time I ever wore a seatbelt in a helicopter. Lighten the aircraft, someone said. Everybody passed boxes out. The pilots strapped in. Suddenly, a blinding flash of lightning exploded in the sky. The world had caught fire. The co-pilot looked at the pilot and said, "Oh." He hesitated. The pilot didn't falter. "Don't sweat it." He checked his instruments. I changed my definition of bravery. The old one was, you're brave if you're scared, but you do it anyway. Now I added, and you don't let anyone know it. I tried to follow the pilot's advice. Don't sweat it. The helicopter blade labored into action. The gunner and crew chief climbed in behind their machine guns. I heard clicks and the scrape of metal on metal as they readied their weapons. The ship shuddered and lifted off the ground. Fear seized me. Was I losing the battle? The pilot didn't turn on the landing lights. The ship's tail lifted. In the moonless, storm-black night, we began to rise and spiral into the air. My ears popped. Gravity pulled at us. The ship spirals to stay over the camp. If you take off low, the VC will shoot you down. Rain exploded on the windshield. Inside the ship, everything was dark, except for the green glow of the instrument lights. The windshield wipers began to lose their struggle to keep up with the rain. Without warning, a monstrous flash of lightning streaked across the length and breadth of the sky. Fiery fingers reached for us. I couldn't understand why they didn't touch us. Suddenly, the helicopter jolted to the right. Everything went black. I braced for free fall. Instead, the ship shuddered for a few seconds and righted itself and kept flying. The windshield wipers resumed their assigned duties. The instruments glowed green again. We and the ship were still alive. I sat there for a moment in disbelief. The gunner on my side of the helicopter, beside his M60 machine gun, was asleep. Half an hour later, we finally reached our landing point. As if orchestrated, everyone in the chopper exhaled with nervous relief. We were home. God bless our veterans. Those who fought in Vietnam 50 years ago this year, and those who have fought in wars and conflicts before and since. They proved our country's mettle once more. God bless us all, and God bless America. Yeah, I'll take some questions. Anybody have some questions? Yes?
Did you have your own photographer follow you, or was that?
No, that's me. Oh, yeah. Pictures of me in it, handed to somebody. And think about the show that we had. There were people there who knew what they were doing. And when somebody in the group volunteers to take the picture for you, you can be pretty sure they know how to handle a camera. And some of those are pretty good pictures. They are. Of course, I got another 200,000 at home that aren't very good. When you take 1,000 pictures, they're going to get a good one. Yes, in the back.
Did any Donut Dollies ever lose their lives over there?
Did any of the Donut Dollies ever lose their lives in Vietnam? The answer to that, sadly, is yes. 3 were lost, and 1 was wounded in Vietnam. Yes?
What was the personal drive in you?
Personal drive in me to go? Well, I had served in Korea. The reason I went to Korea was because I had a pen pal there, and I wanted to see China. I had heard about China all my life. There's a whole world out there, and I wanted to see it. And I wanted somebody else to pay for it. And after Korea, everybody was so grateful for even the little things we did. And then Vietnam opened up. And I had had some rest, and I had had a chance to teach school for a little while. And I needed out from that. So I signed up for Vietnam, and I found that as grateful as people were in Korea, it was even more in Vietnam. You could do just a little something, and it was wonderful for everybody.
Was it a spiritual friend?
Spiritual, by that, what do you mean?
You felt like you were really contributing to life?
Yeah. You felt so, people were so grateful that I always wanted to do something to make the world better, to make a difference. And that was one of the things I wanted to do, and boy did I. In the back.
Have you ever been back?
No, a lot of the people go back. And they've told me some of the things and changes that they've seen. But I knew that I probably wouldn't have a chance to come back. And so while I was there, I made sure that I appreciated it. I made sure, it's a beautiful, beautiful country. If you think Florida's beautiful, if you like tropical stuff, it's so beautiful there all the time that you just can't help but appreciate it. And I made sure, I was really, a lot of people said, boy, I'd sure like to come back here when the war is over. Well, I'm here now. And I made sure that I appreciated it. And when you go back, it's not the same, it's different. And they said, the people in the villages that they knew were gone. They had been disappeared. And any of the changes and improvements in the country were happening in the cities. Nothing was happening in the villages where these people had been. And it's just disappointing. Somebody on the back, farther, yes?
I was going to ask a woman's question. How many uniforms did you have in that hot country? Did you have to wear the same thing day after day?
No, you couldn't wear a uniform for 2 days. You couldn't wear it for 2 hours. I can't remember. I think we had about 3. And they wash up really nice. And so you wash them and they dry really fast. But it was so hot. You know how you sweat under the arms? We sweat over our entire body. Your whole body was wet under the clothes. And then if there was some dust, it would just stick. And you could take a shower every couple hours. We were only allowed 1 a day, and you made the best of it. But we did, and they did give us water, and we did have soap. And we did have a wash pan that we could wash in on the floor. And a 5-gallon can of water. So you pour some water and some soap and you wash your thing and then you hang it up someplace. Yes?
Okay, this will be our last question. Last question? So make it a good one, Gary.
You know, you mentioned the gentleman in the front row. I was wondering if you served together or how you know them.
Oh, these guys are from the American Legion and VFW also. They have people from Purple Heart and all of the different organizations. They all go to the American Legion and so forth. And then I have many years I have walked with them in the parade on Memorial Day.
I have a picture of you and myself and my daughter.
Is there? You have a picture? I cherish those days, and I've gone whenever I could. They're great.